Okay. So you'll notice here that we're almost done. This is relationships and empathy is, oh no, we're doing courage and communication this week. We're finishing up relationship and empathy is due tonight. And then we have only 3 more weeks. The last one is finals week, so there's no new information there. So we have only 2 more lectures after this lecture today. That's amazing, huh? Only 2 more lectures. But we will have a finals week Zoom. And you can do that instead of doing the final discussion if you wish, just to gather together and share our final project, which must make you wonder what's the final project. Oh my gosh, let's check it out. Well, it's right here, introducing the final self-actualization project. How cool is that? That is so cool. If I do say so myself. Whee! Okay, we're all jumping out of airplanes. Just kidding. There's no way. No way. Anyway, it's worth 25 points, and we'll get it done in increments, and it will be part of the assignment. So this week you have a job this week, and that is to decide on the category you want to focus on for your project. And these are the categories. And what you do for the project is you define something you would like to do or make or create or experience. And then you reference 5 insights that can help you. You learn something new, and I'll guide you on that. Just reading an article's worth of information is enough something new, or listening to a really great TED Talk, but you want to add to the knowledge, because Einstein said, you know, that we can't make a change from the same mindset we were in when the problem happened. So we can't solve a problem from that mindset. We have to change our mindset. So it helps to have more wisdom, more information, right? Lay out the action steps you want to take. Take a few of the action steps, depending on what kind of projects people have, and describe your experience and what you learned. Okay, so that's the project, and we carry it out over the next 4 weeks, and you whittle away at it a little bit each week so that we can get moving on it, and it's not this big glob at the end. Okay, so the 5 categories are that you will choose from. So you'll choose, and this covers pretty much anything, right? Map out a self-care plan, nurture relationships and or expand your social circle. Okay, so if your social circle's contracted, this would be a neat thing. So these are things to make an impact on your life, right? These are things to making the material become part of our life, which I know you've already been doing, but this is like a big focus on that. So this would be about, if your social circle has contracted over the period of COVID, this would be about, providing yourself some structure to expand it out, right? And you define how, and we'll give you some guidelines. Identify and take specific steps to strengthen one of the 4 pillars, which are sleep, exercise, nutrition, and breath. I was watching my fingers there, wondering if I would be able to remember all 4. So you could do 1 or more of the 4 pillars if there's an area there. So you want to listen to what's calling you inside, that wants to actualize itself out. Create something that affirms your values and goals. You know how they have these signs that has words on them and stuff? Having making a sign, or there's all kinds of things that you could, if now would be a good time for creative expression, weaving in what you've learned here, tying that into your creative expression. And I'll show you some examples. I got to put some examples together, and then I'll show them to you guys. Or go on a treasure hunt, or try something new. Okay, so try something new is easy. I mean, I've had students do some fun things in the past, like skydiving. One student actually did do skydiving. Another did that paintball run thing where you get splattered with paint, and they trained themselves for it over this next 4 weeks, because I think we actually have 4 weeks left. Looks small on the thing, but there's a month left. So we have some time still. So but the treasure hunt is about, and I need to flesh these out for you guys, which I will, because I revise this assignment a little bit so it's a little better. So I need to flesh it out a little. But the treasure hunt is basically like, if you don't know what you want to major in, you could go on a treasure hunt to discover your major. And there are fun ways of doing that, like career tests and things like that. Or if you don't know what kind of exercise you want to do, you could go on a treasure hunt to try out some different exercises, and that's what you're exploring, right? So a treasure hunt to discover something that you would like to discover for and with yourself. Okay, so this is fun to pick one of these categories. And again, you'll be walked through doing these steps. But this week's step is basically, it's in the assignment, but it's basically decide on which category you want to do. So we begin by making a commitment. And you might think, I want to do them all, but you can, but one at a time, right? Pick one at a time. So, and some of them fold into the other, right? So like the self-care plan could include the 4 pillars kind of thing. Okay, so do you have any questions at all about that? Courage and communication. Here we go. Rick Hansen is saying a quote here about how we need, it takes courage, comes from the French cœur, which means heart. And we're going to see a film with Brene Brown about living a wholehearted life. And in fact, I just want to start with that film because it's so valuable and I don't want to run out of time. So we will start with this wonderful video. Have any of you heard of? No? She is probably the nun. I'm sure you've heard of TED.com. And Brene Brown is probably the #1 favorite TED speaker on TED. And she's just absolutely beautiful. So vulnerability means open. We can think of vulnerability as open, being open. And Brene Brown is a researcher. And here she does this wonderful talk on the power of being willing to be open and being genuine to yourself. Okay, so here we go. Yeah.
An event planner called me because I was going to do a speaking event, and she called and she said, I'm really struggling with how to write about you on the little flyer. And I thought, well, what's the struggle? And she said, well, I saw you speak, and I'm going to call you a researcher, I think, but I'm afraid if I call you a researcher, no one will come because they'll think you're boring and irrelevant. And I was like, okay. And she said, but the thing I liked about your talk is, you're a storyteller. So I think what I'll do is call you a storyteller. And of course, the academic, insecure part of me was like, you're going to call me a what? And she said, I'm going to call you a storyteller. And I was like, oh, why not Magic Pixie? I was like, let me think about this for a second. And so I tried to call deep on my courage. And I thought, I am a storyteller. I'm a qualitative researcher. I collect stories. That's what I do. And maybe stories are just data with a soul, and maybe I'm just a storyteller. So I said, you know what? Why don't you just say I'm a researcher storyteller? And she went, there's no such thing. So I'm a researcher storyteller. And I'm going to talk to you today. We're talking about expanding perception. And so I want to talk to you and tell some stories about a piece of my research that fundamentally expanded my perception and really actually changed the way that I live and love and work and parent. And this is where my story starts. When I was a young researcher, doctoral student, my first year I had a research professor who said to us, here's the thing, if you cannot measure it, it does not exist. And I thought he was just sweet talking to me. I was like, really? And he's like, absolutely. So you have to understand that I have a bachelor's in social work, a master's in social work, and I was getting my PhD in social work. So my entire academic career was surrounded by people who kind of believed in the life's messy, love it, and I'm more of the life's messy, clean it up, organize it, and put it into a bento box. And so to think that I had found my way, to found a career that takes me, really one of the big sayings in social work is lean into the discomfort of the work. And I'm like, knock discomfort upside the head and move it over and get all A's. That was my mantra. So I was very excited about this. And so I thought, you know what, this is the career for me because I am interested in some messy topics, but I want to be able to make them not messy. I want to understand them. I want to hack into these things that I know are important and lay the code out for everyone to see. So where I started was with connection, because by the time you're a social worker for 10 years, what you realize is that connection is why we're here. It's what gives purpose and meaning to our lives. This is what it's all about. It doesn't matter whether you talk to people who work in social justice and mental health and abuse and neglect. What we know is that connection, the ability to feel connected, is neurobiologically, that's how we're wired. It's why we're here. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to start with connection. Well, you know that situation where you get an evaluation from your boss and she tells you 37 things that you do really awesome and one thing that you can't, an opportunity for growth. And all you can think about is that opportunity for growth, right? Well, apparently this is the way my work went as well, because when you ask people about love, they tell you about heartbreak. When you ask people about belonging, they'll tell you the most excruciating experiences of being excluded. And when you ask people about connection, the stories they told me were about disconnection. So very quickly, really about 6 weeks into this research, I ran into this unnamed thing that absolutely unraveled connection in a way that I didn't understand or had never seen. And so I pulled back out of the research and thought, I need to figure out what this is. And it turned out to be shame. And shame is really easily understood as the fear of disconnection. Is there something about me that if other people know it or see it, that I won't be worthy of connection? The things I can tell you about it, it's universal. We all have it. The only people who don't experience shame have no capacity for human empathy or connection. No one wants to talk about it, and the less you talk about it, the more you have it. What underpinned this shame, this I'm not good enough, which we all know that feeling. I'm not blank enough. I'm not thin enough, rich enough, beautiful enough, smart enough, promoted enough. The thing that underpinned this was excruciating vulnerability. This idea of, in order for connection to happen, we have to allow ourselves to be seen, really seen. And you know how I feel about vulnerability. I hate vulnerability. And so I thought, this is my chance to beat it back with my measuring stick. I'm going in, I'm going to figure this stuff out. I'm going to spend a year. I'm going to totally deconstruct shame. I'm going to understand how vulnerability works, and I'm going to outsmart it. So I was ready, and I was really excited. As you know, it's not going to turn out well. You know this. So I could tell you a lot about shame, but I'd have to borrow everyone else's time. But here's what I can tell you that it boils down to. And this may be one of the most important things that I've ever learned in the decade of doing this research. My 1 year has turned into 6 years, thousands of stories, hundreds of long interviews, focus groups. At one point, people were sending me journal pages and sending me their stories, thousands of pieces of data in 6 years. And I kind of got a handle on it. I kind of understood this is what shame is. This is how it works. I wrote a book. I published a theory, but something was not okay. And what it was is that if I roughly took the people I interviewed and divided them into people who really have a sense of worthiness, that's what this comes down to, a sense of worthiness. They have a strong sense of love and belonging. And folks who struggle for it, and folks who are always wondering if they're good enough. There was only one variable that separated the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging and the people who really struggle for it, and that was the people who have a strong sense of love and belonging believe they're worthy of love and belonging. That's it. They believe they're worthy. And to me, the hard part of the one thing that keeps us out of connection is our fear that we're not worthy of connection. Was something that personally and professionally I felt like I needed to understand better. So what I did is I took all of the interviews where I saw worthiness, where I saw people living that way, and just looked at those. What do these people have in common? And I have a slight office supply addiction, but it's another talk. So I had a manila notebook, a manila folder, and I had a Sharpie, and I was like, what am I going to call this research? And the first words that came to my mind were wholehearted. These are kind of wholehearted people living from this deep sense of worthiness. So I wrote at the top of the manila folder, and I started looking at the data. In fact, I did it first in this in a 4-day, very intensive data analysis where I went back, pulled these interviews, pulled the stories, pulled the incidents. What's the theme? What's the pattern? My husband left town with the kids because I always go into this kind of Jackson Pollock crazy thing where I'm just like writing and going and kind of just in my researcher mode. And so here's what I found. What they had in common was a sense of courage. And I want to separate courage and bravery for you for a minute. Courage, the original definition of courage, when it first came to the English language, it's from the Latin word cur, meaning heart. And the original definition was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. And so these folks had, very simply, the courage to be imperfect. They had the compassion to be kind to themselves first and then to others, because as it turns out, we can't practice compassion with other people if we can't treat ourselves kindly. And the last was they had connection, and this was the hard part, as a result of authenticity. They were willing to let go of who they thought they should be in order to be who they were, which is, you have to absolutely do that for connection. The other thing that they had in common was this. They fully embraced vulnerability. They believed that what made them vulnerable made them beautiful. They didn't talk about vulnerability being comfortable, nor did they really talk about it being excruciating, as I had heard it earlier in the shame interviewing. They just talked about it being necessary. They talked about the willingness to say, I love you first. The willingness to do something where there are no guarantees. The willingness to breathe through waiting for the doctor to call after your mammogram. The willing to invest in a relationship that may or may not work out. They thought this was fundamental. I personally thought it was betrayal. I could not believe I had pledged allegiance to research, where our job, the definition of research is to control and predict, to study phenomenon for the explicit reason to control and predict. And now my my mission to control and predict had turned up the answer that the way to live is with vulnerability and to stop controlling and predicting. This led to a little breakdown, which actually looked more like this. And it did. It led to I call it a breakdown. My therapist calls it a spiritual awakening. Spiritual awakening sounds better than breakdown, but I assure you it was a breakdown. And I had to put my data away and go find a therapist. Let me tell you something. You know who you are when you call your friends and say, I think I need to see somebody. Do you have any recommendations? Because about 5 of my friends are like, woo, I wouldn't want to be your therapist. And I was like, what does that mean? And they're like, I'm just saying, don't bring your measuring stick. Okay. So I found a therapist. My first meeting with her, Diana, I brought in my list of the way the wholehearted live. And I sat down and she said, how are you? And I said, I'm great. I'm okay. And she said, what's going on? And I said, and this is a therapist who sees therapists, because we have to go to those because their BS meters are good. And so I said, here's the thing, I'm struggling. And she said, what's the struggle? And I said, well, I have a vulnerability issue. And, and I know that vulnerability is kind of the core of shame and fear and our struggle for worthiness. But it appears that it's also the birthplace of joy, of creativity, of belonging, of love. And I think I have a problem. And I need some help. And I said, but here's the thing. no family stuff, no childhood shit. I just need some strategies. Thank you. So she goes like this. And then I said, it's bad, right? She said, it's neither good nor bad. It just is what it is. And I said, oh my God, this is gonna suck. And it did, and it didn't. And it took about a year. And you know how there are people that, like, when they realize that vulnerability and tenderness are important, that they kind of surrender and walk into it? A, that's not me. And B, I don't even hang out with people like that. For me, it was a year-long street fight. It was a slugfest. Vulnerability pushed, I pushed back. I lost the fight, but probably won my life back. And so then I went back into the research and spent the next couple of years really trying to understand what they, the wholehearted, what the choices they were making, and what are we doing with vulnerability? Why do we struggle with it so much? Am I alone in struggling with vulnerability? No. So this is what I learned. We numb vulnerability. When we're waiting for the call, it was funny. I sent something out on Twitter and on Facebook that says, how would you define vulnerability? What makes you feel vulnerable? And within an hour and a half, I had 150 responses. Because I wanted to know, what's out there. Having to ask my husband for help because I'm sick and we're newly married. Initiating sex with my husband. Initiating sex with my wife. Being turned down. Asking someone out. Waiting for the doctor to call back, getting laid off, laying off people. This is the world we live in. We live in a vulnerable world. And one of the ways we deal with it is we numb vulnerability. And I think there's evidence, and it's not the only reason this evidence exists, but I think that it's a huge cause. We are the most in debt, obese, addicted, and medicated adult cohort in U.S. history.
Finish it or face like a disciplinary action.
That you cannot selectively numb emotion. You can't say, here's the bad stuff. Here's vulnerability, here's grief, here's shame, here's fear, here's disappointment. I don't want to feel these. I'm going to have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin. I don't want to feel these. And I know that's knowing laughter. I hack into your lives for a living. I know that's, God. You can't numb those hard feelings without numbing the other affects or emotions. You cannot selectively numb. So when we numb those, we numb joy. We numb gratitude. We numb happiness. And then we are miserable and we are looking for purpose and meaning. And then we feel vulnerable. So then we have a couple of beers and a banana nut muffin. And it becomes this dangerous cycle. One of the things that I think that we need to think about is why and how we numb. And it doesn't just have to be addiction. The other thing we do is we make everything that's uncertain certain. Religion has gone from a belief in faith and mystery to certainty. I'm right, you're wrong, shut up. That's it. Just certain. The more afraid we are, the more vulnerable we are, the more afraid we are. This is what politics looks like today. There's no discourse anymore. There's no conversation. There's just blame. You know how blame is described in the research? A way to discharge pain and discomfort. We perfect. If there's anyone who wants their life to look like this, it would be me. But it doesn't work because what we do is we take fat from our butts and put it in our cheeks. Which just, I hope in 100 years, people will look back and go, wow. And we perfect, most dangerously, our children. Let me tell you what we think about They're hardwired for struggle when they get here. When you hold those perfect little babies in your hand, our job is not to say, look at her, she's perfect. My job is just to keep her perfect, make sure she makes the tennis team by 5th grade and Yale by 7th grade. That's not our job. Our job is to look and say, you know what? You're imperfect and you're wired for struggle, but you are worthy of love and belonging. That's our job. Show me a generation of kids raised like that and we'll end the problems I think that we see today. We pretend that what we do doesn't have an effect on people. We do that in our personal lives. We do that corporate, whether it's a bailout, an oil spill, a recall. We pretend like what we're doing doesn't have a huge impact on other people. I would say to companies, this is not our first rodeo, people. We just need you to be authentic and real and say, we're sorry, we'll fix it. But there's another way, and I'll leave you with this. This is what I have found. To let ourselves be seen, deeply seen, vulnerably seen. To love with our whole hearts, even though there's no guarantee. And that's really hard. I can tell you as a parent, that's excruciatingly difficult. To practice gratitude and joy in those moments of kind of terror when we're wondering, can I love you this much? Can I believe in this as passionately? Can I be this fierce about this? Just to be able to stop and instead of catastrophizing what might happen, to say, I'm just so grateful. Because to feel this vulnerable means I'm alive. And the last, which I think is probably the most important, is to believe that we're enough. Because when we work from a place, I believe, that says, I'm enough, then we stop screaming and start listening. We're kinder and gentler to the people around us, and we're kinder and gentler to ourselves. That's all I have.
It's great. So if you want to take a moment to write down anything from that talk you liked or found interesting in the chat. She covers so much about opening up our hearts, about allowing ourselves to be vulnerable, about allowing ourselves to just be who we are and relaxing those defenses. One thing I'd really like you to remember and to maybe, and she's funny and she has lots of talks on YouTube, and maybe consider as a mantra that you say to yourself is, I am enough, I am enough. Because as she mentioned, when we feel that we are enough within, when we cultivate that feeling within, when we grow that within ourselves, then we also grow a bigger space of calmness and okayness. Because imagine the tension of the fear, of worrying that you're not. When in reality, of course you are. Of course we all are, right? And by allowing it within yourself, you simultaneously help other people allow it within themselves. So you're doing a collective act when you allow it within yourself. I am enough. And vulnerability is okay. And feeling vulnerable is okay. We don't need to be terrified of it. It can be okay. It's part of the ebb and flow of life. So this sort of leads us into talking about, continuing from last week, the idea and the recognition that really having wonderful relationships takes a lot of skill, because we're all so different. And I still love this. This is a teacher for me. When I come across somebody who's very different from me, take a step back and imagine the sphere and that they're over there, and I'm going to get some insights into how being on the other side than where I am is, right? So we're all just one facet, and that can give us a little bit of humility. This is a great, Brene Brown is a great contemporary psychologist, researcher, actually she's a sociologist, but sociology studies how people behave in groups, you know, our pack tendencies, and psychology sort of hones in on the individual. But they're a yin and yang, right? They're two sides of the coin of humanity. This is one of our great historical researchers. It's Carl Rogers. You can see he passed in 1987, and he had a massive influence on therapy. All modern therapists are trained in Rogerian perspectives, because he, back when Freud, this is a image of Freud wanted to heal and help, but it was from that doctor-patient where you have a little bit of, the doctor has much more knowledge than the patient, so there's a bit of a hierarchy there. And it was the same with Freud and psychoanalysis, which you needed the analyst to analyze you, right? So there's a little bit of a power dynamic going on there. And Rogers confronted that power dynamic because Rogers recognized that when a person feels inferior to the person that they're with, then they clamp down and they're less open to change, right? So the power dynamic actually interrupts the healing relationship. So Rogers proposed that the therapeutic relationship needed to be one of equality and respect, and that both are on an exploratory journey, and that the therapist's job is to help the person, the client that they're working with, connect with their inner wisdom that's within them. So Rogers also noticed, and that the job is to help cultivate that inner wisdom that was within you, and of course share insights and ideas like you learn in this class, wisdom gathered from people over time, but you also have great wisdom within you. It's your inner North Star that we need to attune to. So Rogers noticed that we have a tendency, we humans do well when we experience these three things in our lives, and when we can express ourselves in these three ways. And one of them is empathy, which means that we're treated with compassion and there's some understanding reflected about how we feel. The other is this thing called unconditional positive regard. And so the way to think about that is it's the attitude you have toward your dear friends. It's the attitude you have towards your children. It's where you see you look for and see the good in them. You focus on the good in them. And if they do something wrong or they make a mistake, like we all do, then they did something wrong and they made a mistake, but your focus is on the good. You don't condemn them, right? Now, this idea of unconditional positive regard, Rogers is suggesting needs to be part of the therapeutic environment. The namaste, I greet the light in you from India, is a phrase that reflects unconditional positive regard. Now, that doesn't mean that you unconditionally live with somebody else, right? So you have to have boundaries about being in a healthy environment. That doesn't mean that if your partner does things that you consider completely wrong and inappropriate, that you stay with them. No. Or that you approve of the things that they did wrong. No, but you still don't demonize the person, is the idea. And you look for the best in them. And then the third part is genuineness, being able to be authentic, being able to be real. Unconditional positive regard also means being able to suspend some judgmentalism. If you think about two people, like each of my hands is a chair, one of the greatest lessons I learned is that we do things and the chairs between us either become closer, well, we don't want to be on each other, but the chairs come closer or they grow further apart, right? So in the therapeutic relationship, you're building connection or it's going away. And there is some natural ebb and flow in people's lives of where we come together and we pull away, and we come together and we pull away like ocean waves. But overall, we can pull away while sustaining connection. So unconditional positive regard also helps us suspend our judgmentalism, because judgmentalism immediately makes the chairs pull away. If you go to a therapist and the therapist says, wow, that was a really crappy thing to do, you don't seem like you got your act together at all. Well, what are you going to do? You're never going to go to that therapist again, right? So you can't, judgmentalism makes people want to leave, right? So Rogers shifted the therapeutic attention from analyzing the patient, figuring the patient out, and even using the word patient. They shifted to using the word client, and they used the word client-centered therapy. So modern therapists are all trained in the Rogerian approach, because it's clear that when we're harsh and judgmental on a person, then they don't want to be around us. That doesn't mean you don't confront things, but we can confront things in a highly respectful way, right? And timing is a big part of that. You all have had the experience of confronting something with something that was bad timing and then good timing, right? So timing really matters. There has to be a time when we're able to be open to receiving difficult news, right? So these are the three things that foster growth within ourselves. And so they're reflections of ways that we want to treat ourselves as well, right? We want to cultivate acceptance, genuineness, cultivate our own ability to be genuine, our real self. And that doesn't mean that, you know, you're constantly blurting exactly what goes through you in a impulsive moment, you know, right this moment I feel this. You really want to connect, like you've noticed that you have an impulsive part of you and then you have a more thoughtful part of you. And most of us want to our behavior to be directed by the more thoughtful part of us, right? Which occasionally, like sometimes we can just totally be impulsive, but it doesn't mean just blurting out. It means attuning to what your higher vision for yourself is, how you really want to be, what your higher truth is, rather than just the momentary truth, right? Like right now, I can't stand you. Whereas the big picture is that I basically love you. Which of those truths is appropriate to say in a given moment? Okay, so I've already spoken what you see on these slides, that his model is the cornerstone of modern therapy. So everybody is trained in this way of approaching somebody. And in fact, if you have someone that you can't treat this way, if somebody comes to see you and they trigger something in you, like for example, let's say this woman had had the therapist had had a partner who betrayed her. And betrayal is one of the painful themes, common experiences that we have in life, right? We see it in movies and stories and stuff, because people make mistakes and are not always able to live up to their values, and they're living up to the level of consciousness of where they are, right? What they've been able to kind of harness and pull together, which you've already learned is a multiplicity of variables, many of which are out of their control. The family they were born in, the biological wiring they have, how they were, you know, what they learned over a lifetime, and some of which is in control, but we gain control of ourselves with heightened awareness. That's where we really start to have control of ourselves. So suppose she has someone who, you know, is betrayed her and is recent, and this couple is dealing with a situation where one of them had an affair. Let's say the wife had an affair on the partner. Well, she may feel that she is feeling a lot of judgmentalism and anger toward the wife over what she did, and not able therefore to approach her from this place where you recognize that a mistake was made, but you still are able to treat the person with that deep level of respect, like when your best friend makes a big mistake and you're able to do. And if you can't, then you refer them to somebody else. That's not always the reason for those referrals. Sometimes the referrals are just because they're too busy and stuff. So we don't know the reason. But personal trigger of the therapist having gone through an event where they haven't finished processing and healing and letting that go, which takes a little bit of time. So they would not, part of the ethical consideration is to realize that, so if they can't treat the person like this, then they want to excuse themselves. And if you don't feel treated like that in a counseling condition, then you want to find somebody else, right? And I think it's very helpful to think of therapists as therapeutic coaches, because that's how they really are. They're coaches, like personal trainers, right? Okay. So not all people are able to give these things to other people. Like you probably have some people in your life that are very judgmental, right? And they're not able to they haven't grown to that level yet. They haven't been exposed to the kind of knowledge you've been exposed to. They haven't been exposed to the idea, especially when they were open to it, of approaching people with curiosity and some of the things that you've learned about suspending judgment. That doesn't mean that you don't have your own values and boundaries and things like that. You do. You hold on to those, but we don't condemn others for being different. So it can help to be aware of those who haven't been able to cultivate these yet. And so they're not feeling it within themselves either fully. and to just be aware of that so that you can be more protective of yourself. You can be more, you can make sure that you self-care when you're interacting with people like that. And we also need to disentangle from overly absorbing criticism from people who aren't able to, give the three, genuineness, unconditional, positive regard, and acceptance, right? Because then if we're too entangled with those people, then we auto react, right? So being able to detach a little bit, to step back. One detachment method is to imagine that, or to just realize that everybody is doing the best they can, and this is where a person is in their growth, and that sort of, and that the universe will take care of making sure they have to learn more, and sometimes we have a role in that as well, right? But we don't necessarily have to be the one that helps them learn, right? Instead, we can take care of ourselves in some of those relationships. So one of the things that we can do is hold on to our sense of self, individual self, while we engage with the others. Sometimes some of us are vulnerable to sort of dissolving and deferring, overly deferring. So we can, one of the exercises in the assignment, if this is a vulnerability, because we all have different vulnerabilities, if this is one of yours, there's a article that is really helpful for reading on some strategies, on some ways of anchoring and holding on to your sense of self while engaging with others. And one of the ones I really like to cultivate for people or encourage people to do is, if you, one of the ones that I did that helped me a lot, and it seems like a really little thing, but it really starts to build your sense of self within yourself. And that is when somebody asks you, what do you want to do? And if you're one of those persons who says whatever you want to do, if you're constantly deferring to the other, at least every other time, stop and ask yourself, what do I really want to do? And be willing to share that, right? Really stop and feel inside yourself. What is it I would like to do? What do I feel like eating tonight? Instead of always deferring that other. And that starts to break the habit of continually deferring, right? So that's one small step you can take to hold on to me within the context of we. So this is the idea that we all have triggers, and becoming aware of the things that trigger us is extremely helpful. One of the things that triggers me, for example, is feeling criticized. So when my partner criticizes me, I get really reactive, right? And one of the things that I learned to do in order to reduce my reactivity to when I feel like he's, and when I should clarify that he's not a critical person, and he's not being harshly critical. He's not like being where, you know what, I wouldn't want my best friend to be in a relationship like this. I wouldn't want one of my kids to be in a relationship like this, listening to somebody talk to them like this on a regular basis. It's not like that at all. If it's like that, then we want to reach out for support and help and get some coaching on deciding on how we want to navigate that relationship. This is more like everyday normal things that people should be able to say without their partner feeling hyper reactive, right? So like, honey, it's really annoying when you do this kind of comment, which I should be able to absorb without reacting. And when we have those situations where we find ourselves reacting, it's good to notice where we find ourselves reacting. Those are little soft spots, little wounds we got when we were younger, where for whatever reason, and a lot of times the wounds we get when we're younger are not from anybody's intentionally wanting to hurt us, but circumstances are such that as a child we're very sensitive, we overabsorb it. Maybe the parent's going through a rough time and they're over harsh, and we're going through a sensitive time and we absorb it completely, and so we get this or maybe the parent is just really they're doing their best, but they tend to be a critical person, and that's where they are. And so we come into an adult, and anytime somebody even tries to say something softly critical, we hyper react. So what do we need to do in a situation like this is be willing to embrace that vulnerable part of ourselves that's afraid of criticism, right? You can even imagine that part of yourself and open your heart and let it climb in your lap and just say, tell me all about your vulnerability, about how you don't like being criticized. And then open ourselves up to making it okay. It's okay for me to make mistakes. It's okay for me to not be perfect. It's okay for me to not be perfect is really the mantra for the person who is hypersensitive to criticism. I get to be imperfect too, right? We get to be imperfect too. So noticing our triggers. And one of the other things that we can notice is if we have a hard time, if we're set off by certain personality types, like people who tend to always run late or authority figures, right? And what we want to do is soften our reactivity to that type, right? By tending to the part of ourselves that is hurt. I mean, it's a signal when we have a trigger that we've been hurt by that there's a hurt in there that hasn't been fully healed yet, and we can play an active part in fully healing ourselves. And the thing we're sensitive to can give us a clue to how we can heal it. For example, if authority types bug us, then we somewhere along the line we absorb the idea that it's not okay for us to express our full autonomy. So when somebody comes in as, I mean, we're almost, it's transference. We're a little jealous of that authority, so it pisses us off. So we can exert more authority, more autonomy in our own lives. And with people who run late, if you're somebody who likes things to be exactly on time, but that person runs late, you can set a boundary about how long you will wait, and not, because there are different types. So there is the JP type and the Myers-Briggs, and the J type likes things on time, and the P type runs, sort of freewheeling. And the J type is in time, and the P type is in the moment. So they have a different experience of time. So this is one of those things where recognizing the spectrum of difference, providing some room for that person to be different, and taking care of ourselves in the meantime. So we could do something like set a boundary that, I'll wait 15 minutes, but that's all I can handle. It's all I can stand. And so you let them know that. I know that things get in the way and there's flexibility, but I can wait 15 minutes and that's all I can do. And then you bring something with you to entertain yourself, which is so easy to do these days with our phones, right? And we anticipate it. So there are ways, and this is something like if you have a sensitivity that is not one I just finished talking about, then we can, and that's something that you would like to attend to in your project, we can brainstorm finding your resources to help you tune in and heal that particular vulnerability. Because it's remarkable, we have the most unbelievable library in the world, video library, information library at our fingertips, and we can heal these things. We bring them to the light of awareness, and then we can do some imaginal processes to help heal them. Now, last week we talked about this big five. We have open to new experiences, and the differences that we have opposite or different ways that people can be on a spectrum, and people who are really different from you are the ones where we a lot of times have conflict. And each of these has a little bit different of a communication style too, right? So, this just gives you some tips. Highly open people, like when you're talking to people and someone is a certain way, this just gives you some ideas about how you can approach them. Like highly open people love to talk about their adventures. Those who are tried and true like to talk about the things that bring them a feeling of stability and comfort. Highly conscientious people like to talk about the details of their day. Extroverts like to talk more. Agreeable people tend to pay more attention to feelings in talk, and disagreeable people don't want to talk about feelings at all. And emotional stability relates to how we deal with vulnerability to anger or anxiety. So I do think that, I used to have a chessboard, and I should put a chessboard on here with chess pieces. And I used to look at the chessboard, and I used to imagine the pieces were different people in my life. And I would think about what do each of those persons like? Who loves to feel like a queen? Who loves to feel like a king? Who likes to be kind of a warrior style, like the knight? Um, so what are the different kinds of, just as a way to reflect on the people in my life and reflect on what they value, what they appreciate in relationships. There's a book on this called, what is it called? Does anybody know? It's I think it's your relationship style or your communication style. Oh, the 5 love languages, I think it is. That we all have different ways of experiencing like what makes us feel loved. Some people feel more loved by having things done for them. That's me. I love it when my husband does something like the dishes or takes care of a job. That makes me feel loved. Other people feel loved by being respected. That's my partner. When I express respect for him or appreciation, he feels really loved. I like being expressions of expressive and appreciation, but they don't carry as much weight as getting a chore off my plate, man. So it's neat to think about the different people and what makes them feel loved. And a lot of times it's really little things. Like my mom, for example, she feels really, really loved when I let her talk for a long time and I don't cut her off. I don't end the conversation early, And then the other thing is when like I look like I'm happy to see her. I don't just go, "Hi, Mom," but "Hey, Mom." Like when I look like I'm happy to see her, that just really lifts her up. So noticing what makes people feel good. And of course, we have the emotional valence of a relationship, which means that all of our relationships are tagged as, all your classes are tagged, right? As with an emotional tone. We have emotional tones with everything. So if we have a negative tag on a relationship, then when we approach that relationship, our defenses are already underway, right? So we're already in kind of a negative red brain state when we approach the relationship. So it's harder. One of the things that can help us strengthen our relationships is to cultivate points of connection. And I think this is such a simple and such a valuable tool. I use this tool all the time. It's a mind tool. And what you do is you think about the person that you're going to be spending time with, and I draw a star. And then I write down all the things that we have in common, that we would like to do together, that we enjoy, that we both enjoy, that we have points of connection. And there are some people in my life where I only have 2 things on the star, right? It doesn't go all the way around. Like we only have 2. My mom and I have a lot that we share in common. So it's pretty easy for us to find things to do together and to talk about. But with other people in my family, my extended family, there aren't as many things on the point of connection. But if I can think about what is on that point of connection, even with people that you're in conflict with, it's really helpful to do this with people you're in conflict with, right? Because there will be something that you have in common that you both value. It might be the kids and doing what's best for the kids. It might be the environment and helping the environment, right? But there will be a value somewhere, and you have that place. Every time, when people work with people in great conflict, cities and nations and groups in great conflict, the first thing they do is look for a point of connection. And the same is true for people who are doing things like hostage negotiation and things like that. With the person who's taking the hostage and the negotiator, the first thing they do is they try to find a point of connection, a place from which to build, right? Build and move the direction in the way that you want it to go, right? Which is in a healthy direction, whether you are just connecting to relay information or whatever it might be. So thinking about the points of connection is one of my favorite tools for how to work with relationships. This is another super important one. And that is that it's not our job to fix another person, but to empower them to fix themselves when they're ready to do so. We don't want to try, it's funny. Men shouldn't turn their sweetheart into a housewife, into doing all the chores for them, because then they'll feel like a mother. and they won't want to have sex. And women shouldn't turn their husband into a fix-it project, because then they'll feel like, I mean, sorry, did I do that right? Yeah. Women who feel like mothers, you know, unconsciously, they'll feel like I'm having to be your mom here, and that will break down a relationship. Another thing that breaks down relationships is when the women want to fix the man all the time and transform the man, or it could be however the gender roles work, whichever way, it doesn't matter, mix them up any which way. The point is that one person trying to fix the other turns that person into the archetypal parent, and they don't like that. And if you're an archetypal parent in the head, in the back of the, you know, if you act too much like a parent, then the chemistry, the romantic chemistry dissipates. That's probably a more universal way of describing the phenomena. So we want to empower people as much as we can. There's always a balance there, because we need each other at times. We get sick, we get weak, we get vulnerable, and we're young, sometimes taking care of children, right? So there are times where somebody's working a million hours and the other person's carrying the load for a while. But overall, we want to try to sustain a sense of empowering the other person. I know you can find a solution to this, and I'm here to be by your side all the way, is a great counter to a codependent impulse of I'll fix it for you, right? Here, I'll fix it for you. Instead of that, you know, I know you've got what it takes to resolve this, and I'm here to support you all the way. All right, letting go of being right when it's appropriate to let go of being right. Our ego has really thrust itself forward, right? So I notice, like, we'll be sitting in a group of people talking, and my mind will come up with something to say, but everybody in a group is so excited sharing that I can't find a way to get my word in edgewise, and I'll just want to push myself forward, right? You can see the ego push, and the ego is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. We need an ego to interact with others, but we don't want to be ruled by our ego, right? We want to be able, ego is like a tool, like intellect and imagination and love. These are all things that we can access, but we don't want to be taken over by the ego, right? So it's always good to ask ourselves, when somebody's one-upped, when we make somebody else wrong and we're right, that person who's made wrong doesn't like it and will project a, you know, I don't like that you made me feel wrong. So that's why the win-win is nice approach to things, at least honoring both points of view. So power struggles happen all the time in relationships, and it's sort of a dance. We have these power struggle dances that we have with each other. So knowing when to give and let go of trying to hold on to being right, and when to assert, right? Because there are moments when you really want to assert. And then this is about some languaging. It provides some ideas for how to ask for things, how to express how you feel without making the other person wrong, right? And it's helpful to prepare the ground by first nurturing goodwill in the relationship by saying something positive, right? And you can say that, you can see that at the beginning of each of these phrases, that it leads with something that affirms the I thou, right? The first thing is that I care about you, and I'd like to bring something up. I care about you. I care about us, and I'd like to bring something up. Starting off with something that expresses your care, first of all, anchors you to remembering that the whole relationship matters, not just this one thing, right? This one thing matters too, but we want to keep the whole relationship in perspective. And then move into the one thing, right? So it establishes a respect for the connection and then asks for the change, right? So you can see with each of these phrases how it does it. I value what you say a lot, but it's hard for me to hear you when I feel so criticized, right? We went to the restaurant you wanted to last time, and I really enjoyed it. Can we go to the one I would like to this time, right? This is a non-defensive way of responding to somebody who's hurt your feelings, which is surprisingly effective. You know, And you don't even have to put in the ask. Here's the ask. Can you ease up a bit? You can just say, ouch, that hurt. Pause. That gives the other person a little bit of time to go, well, maybe I should take a few steps back there. Okay, so, and this one acknowledges, in this one, the person is acknowledging that they're asking for something, they're asking the other person to change for you. Like, I'm asking you to change to accommodate me and my preferences, right? And honoring that. So finding a way to articulate that, right? So these are great ways. And each of these, this is another topic that's in the assignments, that if you have some things, a lot of times being able to say something that's hard for us to say, a lot of it has to do with being able to find the right languaging, to find the right words. So that's also an option choice in the assignment. So you can see here, there's books on this, how to have challenging conversations and things like that. And laying the right groundwork. You learned about emotional money in the bank, right? Laying the right groundwork and learning some really good phraseology can really help with asserting ourselves and having the best outcome. This is the HEART model, which is a really nice model to think about how to work through something with somebody else. And it's hear, empathize, apologize, respond, and thank. Okay, so this is hearing what they're saying, really allowing yourself to take it in, which is much easier to do when you're remembering to say the mantra to yourself that, you know, I am worthy, I am worthy, I am worthy, I am worthy, I am worthy. And if you feel worthy, if you feel validated within, it's a lot easier to hear another person's point of view and empathize with them. Apologizing when we need to, which we often do, you know, I'm sorry about that. And making apologizing easier for you. If apologizing is really hard, you know, start just practicing apologizing for the small things all the time. Oh, whoops, I'm sorry about that. You know, just to desensitize you from being intimidated by apologizing. And notice that it also is a clue that you're worried that you might do something wrong, or that people don't, you know, that you have a fear of that. So soothe that fear within yourself too. Okay, and the idea that relationships are built on repair, that we really strengthen our relationships by being willing to accept that we are vulnerable and we make mistakes, and that it's okay. It's okay to be vulnerable, and that others make mistakes too. This is a nice video clip we don't have time to watch today, but it's Fred Luskin, and he's from Stanford, the Stanford Forgiveness Institute, and he's talking about forgiveness, and it's very good. He's written a book called Forgive for Good, and he's, like I said, he runs the Stanford Forgiveness Institute, so he's one of the leading experts on forgiveness. And forgiveness is not about, forgiveness is you dropping the baggage of carrying the resentment and the grudge. It's not about forgetting. You want to stay wizened and aware, right? You're going to learn from that experience that you had where the person did something that you feel, you know, that left you with such a mark that you would need to forgive. But when we carry that pain inside of ourselves, we're carrying it inside of ourselves, and it can be released. And so if that's something that you would like to do, that's a wonderful project idea, is to decide to forgive, learn a little bit. This is a short TED Talk. I think each part is 10 minutes. So you can go back and watch that. The if then is a great technique to know and use. Like, if this happens, then I will do that. So if you find yourself, like if you're aware of certain times when you overreact or things like that, you can see you can come up with your own if then personal code. Like, if my partner and I argue and it gets heated, then I will ask for a break and use the time to soothe myself, right? So this becomes your rule book for what you do in these scenarios where you might lose control or start to, you know, move into a red brain state. If my friend is late, then I will let them know I can only wait 10 minutes. If it's more my friend is more critical than I can deal with, then I will let them know that I have to go take a break. You know, I'm feeling flooded or overwhelmed by this much criticism. I need to take a break for a while and then I'll call you. Okay. So the if then is a really great technique of when you identify through self awareness of things that are touching where you're touching. And then some people are just not healthy for us to be around. They may be consistently angry, critical, or difficult. And in those kinds of things, I really want to encourage you to realize that like 90% of the people in your life will follow the general relationship rules, but 5 to 10% of them won't. They will be unduly harsh, unduly critical, bullying, authoritarianism, you know, excessive narcissism. You know, if you end up with somebody like that as a boss or a member of a family that you can't distance yourself from, then definitely reach out for support and coaching on that specific topic. Okay, on dealing with that. And this is the idea. This slide shows you some of the kinds of behaviors of healthy versus unhealthy relationships and abusive relationships. Relationships where one of the persons is so out of sorts that they're actually harmful for you to be around. And so you'll need to set up some serious boundaries with those people. And here are some of the resources we have at Butte College. The Safe Place, Culture and Community Center, and the Health Center has our therapists, and the Safe Place and Culture and Community Center both have amazing people who are just so ready and can totally relate. They've all been through. Most people who go into mental health have experienced these kinds of things and come out the other side. And that's so they have learned from personal experience, the wounded healer idea. So the next thing is that we already watched this video, The Power of Vulnerability. So you've seen it, but the students that are watching this that aren't here with us today, this video is fantastic. You will love it. She's funny. She's got great heart. And she speaks about the courage to be our authentic selves and the power of vulnerability, which we usually think of as a weakness. But it's actually being able to be vulnerable is the very stuff of life, right? It's like the soil of life, the soil of being able to grow new things and create. All right, so to conclude, everybody, what did you find most valuable? What did you like the best? I'll do the quick scroll through. If you could throw that into the chat. We talked about the spectrum of relationships, how we need to continually really work all our lives to develop the skill of relationship. We were introduced to Carl Rogers, whose ideas about empathy, unconditional positive regard, and being able to be our authentic and real self, our genuine self, became the core values of therapy, right? And are also the core things that are behind, you know, when we have to be fake for people on a consistent basis, then it makes us feel split, right? So we want to be able to feel genuine. And we talked about being aware of how well people in your life are able to give these to you, and that we can also cultivate giving them to ourselves. So people aren't perfect. So you're going to have some people in your life that aren't able to give those that well, and you'll have some people who are really good at it. If you don't have any people who are really good at it, that's your job. That's your project, is to cultivate some new relationships with people who are really good at this. And a great place to start is support groups. We talked about disentangling and not being enmeshed. Being enmeshed was when you're too tangled up with somebody that you're just reactive to each other all the time. So there needs to be a little bit of, you know, two separate people so you can observe and not necessarily have to be totally reactive. The idea of holding on to me while being we. The idea of being aware of and working to soothe the triggers that you have so that you can calm them down. You don't have to live with them like that all your life. You can calm down triggers that were developed, right? We learned about the Big Five. This is just a little bit about how different ways that the Big Five people communicate. We could go into that tons, and then we talked about being discerning, about noticing what the people in your life value and how they feel rewarded, what makes them feel rewarded, what makes them feel appreciated. We talked about how all relationships are tagged with an emotional valence or tone, feeling tone. And that if we have too many negative interactions, then we're primed to react defensively in that particular relationship. So we'll have to work extra hard on those to cultivate goodwill. And one way to cultivate goodwill is to connect with people in your life. Think about the points of connection you have and cultivate them, flourish them. We talked about stepping back from being the fixer about other people and apply that instead to something in your life that needs to be fixed, right? Our fixer energy we could redirect to something within our own life and instead be the empowerer person with the people in your life, right? And we talked about letting go of needing to be right, the power struggle of being right, being willing to take a step back and allowing some room for everybody to be right now and then. How to ask for change, right? And making sure you lead asking for change with some goodwill, emotional money in the bank. This is some examples of being able to express yourself without being condemning of the other person, and that there are more things that you can learn about, we can learn about how to have challenging conversations in skillful ways that enable us to approach them. And then the HEART model of communication, which just reminds us that it's perfectly okay to apologize, and it's a really good idea to express things. That repair is normal in relationships. Normal, normal, normal. We want to normalize saying my bad, whoops, I'm sorry. And that occasionally we will need to be willing to forgive, which is letting go of carrying a grudge or burden within our own heart, right? Then also how we can increase self-awareness about the specific triggers that we have and use the if-then model to come up with a plan for how to respond to them so that we can become increasingly skillful at managing those things that set us off in skillful ways. And that there are some people that are very imbalanced, and with those people that we want to get some extra support and knowledge and information if we have to deal with people like that in our lives, which occasionally we will. So we want to be wise about how we manage those kinds of situations. And then the last thing was Brene Brown information on wholehearted, bringing your whole heart into your relationships and being willing to be vulnerable, which is also being willing to be authentic. Treat people like seeing the best in people as best as you can, giving them the benefit of the doubt. That's unconditional positive regard and empathy. Okay, that concludes it for today, everybody. Thank you all so much.